Or maybe I should sit down here and take a look at my perfectly regular sized chessboard. Oh my! It seems that I have turned into a giant. Look how big my hands have become. That is very surprising. Oh, and there is a recording device. Hello, recording device. And hello to anybody who may or may not be watching this recording, wherever you are. This is my perfectly regularly sized chess set. And apparently I have been turned into a giant. That may be very fitting, a bit of foreshadowing maybe, because I am really in the mood to talk about some giants of the chessboard. So I am going to show you guys a game of chess. And that game starts with this pawn going from this square to this square. So that square is called D2, and this square is called D4. So the pawn has moved from D2 to D4, and that is the first sort of innocuous little move in an epic chess game. And I will take you through it. I will explain everything, every little thing, as we go along. Who played this move? Well, in truth, pawn to d4 on the first move with the white pieces has been played thousands and thousands of times. But this particular time was in 1959 in Yugoslavia, then Yugoslavia in Zagreb. And the player who played it was 22-year-old Mikhail Tal. His opponent here, with the black pieces, responded to this opening move with his knight. This knight moved from G8 to F6. To F6. And you can see how I use these coordinates of the chessboard. They are very, very smart. Chess is a very old game, and because of these coordinates, because of this system, it's very easy to write down an entire game of chess. So this game is from 1959. We have games dating back more than 500 years. And the same 8 by 8 squares, the same game, the royal game, chess. And that is one of the absolute beauties of this game. But who played this move, knight from G8 to F6? Well, that was another absolute giant of the chessboard, Bobby Fischer from the United States of America. And why were 22-year-old Mikhail Tal playing then 16-year-old Bobby Fischer, you may ask? He played pawn from C2 to C4, and Bobby played pawn from G7 to G6. They were playing a tournament, and not just any tournament. They were playing what is known as the Candidates Tournament. And here Tal played knight from B1 to C3. And Bobby Fischer responded with the bishop to G7. Tal was from Riga and that meant he was playing for the Soviet Union. And what is this candidates tournament? What does this candidate mean? Well, the word candidate is chosen specifically because this tournament was meant to determine the candidate or the challenger who would earn the right by winning this tournament to challenge the reigning world champion. He was a countryman of Tal. He was from the Soviet Union as well, and he was called Mikhail Tal, an absolute legend of the chessboard in his own right. And why, you may ask, was a 22-year-old and a 16-year-old playing for such high stakes? Tal, in this position, played the pawn from e2 to e4. And Bobby Fischer responded with the pawn from d7 to d6. And this is so I'd just like to make a small note, as to why he did this. So you can see he's been playing here on the flank. He's playing a flank opening known as the King's Indian. This is the King's Indian, this bishop here. And his plan is to castle his king away to safety quickly, neglecting the center of the battlefield. And then later, when his opponent has sort of showed their hand, he wants to strike at the center and find the weak spot in the center. So why does he play this d6 move instead of just castling? Well, with Tal's last move, pawn to e4, he was now threatening to advance this pawn and chase this knight away. And Bobby could not allow this, so he played this pawn here to sort of get some control of this e5 square. Now back to the other question. Why was a 22-year-old playing for such a spot against a guy like a child? He was only 16 years old. Well, basically, these guys were just very, very good. They were extremely talented and they worked extremely hard. Bobby Fischer, at the age of 16, had gone through this grueling process of winning the interzonals, which are very tough tournaments where you only play like very top-ranking chess grandmasters, and then if you do very well in the interzonals, you get to qualify for the candidates tournament, and then you meet like the biggest, meanest beasts the chess world has to offer. So who was also playing in this tournament? There were 8 players. 4 of those I just like to mention by name. We had Bobby Fischer, Mikhail Tal, Vasily Smyslov, and Tigran Petrosyan. Yeah. All of those 4 people had either been world champion before, in the case of Vasily Smyslov, or they would go on later in life to become world chess champion. So out of 8 players, 4 would succeed at some point in their life of becoming the world chess champion. So this was an extremely strong tournament. But Bobby Fischer, being only 16 years old, if you go and watch some other videos on my channel, I have one called The Game of the Century that he played when he was, I believe, 13 years old. You will see that he had a mind that was very, very, very good for chess. If you read up on the history of Bobby Fischer, you may notice that his mind may not have been particularly well suited for other things besides chess, because he actually ended up going quite crazy, unfortunately. At the age of 13, he won the US Chess Championship. Not the junior division, the adult open division, open to the strongest US players. He won it very convincingly. In fact, he won it every single time he ever participated. So, an absolute genius. But now he was up against Tal here with the white pieces, who in this position played the bishop from f1 to f2. And Bobby castled to the king side here. And here we see knight from g1 to f3 from Tal. Now let's talk a little bit about this guy Tal here. Who was he? He was the kind of guy who, for instance, just had his appendix removed. So it's sort of a larger surgical operation of, like, he 2 weeks before entering the candidate tournament here, he had his appendix removed, and he was not allowed to stand up and walk around. Doctor's orders. He did so anyways. He was this guy who just absolutely loved chess. And when you see this game and you see other games that he has played, you will maybe get this sense of just this aesthetic, magical, artistic feeling. And because of this, because of his absolute brilliance and artistic flair, he was so liked among all the other chess grandmasters and top players. A guy like Bobby Fischer here with the black pieces, he actually suffered from paranoia. He had a very, very rough childhood, and I'm not going to make excuses for him, because everybody, of course, has to be the best version of themselves, and just because you have a tough childhood doesn't mean that you should sort of harbor some of the hatreds that he did or whatever. But I mean, he had a very tough life, and he got quite paranoid as a result, and he did not like the Soviet players, except for Tal. In Tal, he found a guy who could speak to him about chess and who shared his love and passion for the only thing that Bobby Fischer understood. Bobby Fischer understood these 64 squares maybe better than anybody else in history, but he didn't understand much else. And then he meets a guy like Tal, who was also just, he understands it on a deep level, but he also enjoys it. He sees the beauty, and they became friends. It also didn't help that, it also helped, of course, that Tal was this jovial guy that, he would joke around, and he would always, even though he had many health problems and all kinds of problems in his life, he would also always come with a smile and, just make jokes and have a good time, where the other Russian players were, quite stiff. And one of them even, Petrosyan, who was also playing in this tournament, it was later found out that he was also an actual KGB agent, KGB being the secret service of the Soviet secret service. So these were pretty uptight guys, except for Tal. So let's get back to the game. And in this position, after this knight move, Bobby Fischer played pawn from e7 to e5. Finally challenging Tal's center here in the middle of the chessboard. And if you are only watching for the ASMR component of this video, that's of course completely fine. If you are interested in picking up some, let's say, chess tips that you can use if you want to beat your spouse or your mother or your dad or something in this amazing game, then I have a little tip for you here, and it's about the center of the board. At some point, your strategy has to include staking a claim in the center, because he or she or whoever controls the center of the chessboard, controls the entire chessboard. Before I've said control the spice, control the universe, control the center, control the chessboard. Okay? And that may not make intuitive sense for you just yet, but if you try to focus on it in your games, you will soon see the importance of this little heuristic. Tal decided that he was not going to draw first blood or let Fischer draw first blood. He was not going to capture here, for instance. He was also not going to, for instance, castle like this. This is something he wants to do at some point, but he's not going to do it right now because he does not want to allow Bobby Fischer to capture this pawn. So he advanced the d4 pawn to d5. And the reason that he chose this line is because of his playing style. Tal wanted to attack. Tal wanted to play brilliant, ferocious, genius-inspired chess with sacrificial attacks against the opponent's king. And don't worry, we will see that in this game. But he was a principled chess player as well. He knew the logic of chess. He knew that you have to be ready to your pieces have to be coordinated. He's an artist, like a musician, and he wants to create a harmony, and for that he needs all the voices of the orchestra. I mean, he needs every single piece to be playing their part to create this harmonious attack. And that is why he is slowly building up. He's, for instance, doing this. He's not opening up the game just yet because he wants a way to have this guy, this guy, and this guy. They are already developed. They are already in the game. But he also wants this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy to participate in the attack. And right now, they are not doing that much. Okay, so what did Bobby do? Bobby played the knight on b8 to d7. And maybe we should talk a little bit about these moves here. So, how did they know to play these moves? How did they come up with these ideas? Well, in fact, they didn't. These were all old ideas, tried and tested. As I mentioned before, the coordinates of the chessboard makes it really, really easy to write down a game of chess. We've been doing that for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that means that these chess geniuses, they can go and look at other games their fellow grandmasters have been playing, and they can say, okay, when this guy starts with this move and their opponent plays that, and then so on and so forth, and then they can find, okay, here I think that was a mistake. I think that was the turning point. They will analyze it very deeply. They have helpers called seconds, who are usually also chess grandmasters, who will analyze with them. Today, modern chess grandmasters also use chess computers to analyze and find out, okay, there is an improvement here, or maybe we can do that and we can do that. And that is why they are playing these moves. So this is part of what they call their opening preparation. And there's an interesting point about this opening preparation and about this particular opening that we will see quite soon. For now, Tal wanted this bishop in the game, so he played bishop from c1 to g5. And this introduces a tactical theme that is called a relative pin. So let me explain what that is. You see, this bishop is attacking this knight. It could go and capture this knight. But if this knight moves, we see that this bishop can now capture the queen. And that's a big loss for black. And that means we would say that the bishop pins the knight to the queen. It's a relative pin because the knight is still allowed to move. If black was somehow able to maybe create a checkmate with moving the knight, it could be justified. Of course, now you would just lose the queen for no compensation, but that is why we call it a relative pin. Had it been a king here on this square, moving the knight would actually be illegal because you are not allowed to move in such a way that you put your king in check. And that would be an absolute pin, but this is a relative pin. And here, Bobby, along with his seconds, and actually Bobby Fischer's second for this match, not this match, this whole tournament, was my countryman, the Danish Great Dane Bent Larsen, who was in this period also one of the best chess players in the world. And he was Danish, and he was a pride and joy in Denmark, and a very cool guy. Quite a bit older than Bobby, but already working for the young American chess genius. And they had come up with this move in their opening preparation. They had looked at all the different games from this position, and they found that they liked this pawn from h7 to h6, attacking this bishop. The Tal is not going to let this bishop be captured, so we played bishop from g5 to h5. And then Bobby played this move, pawn from a7 to a6. And now let's talk a little bit about how openings in chess evolve, because this move marks this opening as the Petrosian variation of the King's Indian. So Petrosian was another chess grandmaster, later chess world champion, who was playing in this tournament, and he had at some point previously come up with this move, pawn from a7 to a6 in this position. And Bent Larsen and Bobby Fischer felt at that point that that was a good move, and they tried it in this game against Tal. When I say they tried it, of course, Bent Larsen was not allowed to be at the table. You're not allowed to receive outside help of any sort while you play these games. But in their hotel room, before, they had prepared this opening amongst many others. Of course, they have to prepare a lot of different openings because they don't know what their opponent is going to play. So chess grandmasters have literally thousands of moves memorized. That is one of the many demanding things that is needed of a chess grandmaster. This move to a6 was popular in 1959. Now, today, you will not see the great chess players of today like Magnus Carlsen or Alireza, Firouzja Alireza or Anand, any of these top grandmasters today. They will not play pawn from a7 to a6 in this position. They will not play the Petrosyan variation of the King's Indian. Maybe they won't even play the King's Indian, but if they do, they will not play this move. They will play something else. Most popular is pawn not to a6, but to a5. Okay. Interesting. This game we are looking at here, this is one of the reasons that pawn to a6 fell out of fashion. The way Tal orchestrated the attack and exploited the slightly unambitious pawn to a6 made this variation fall out of favor. Tal's first move here was to castle his king to the king side, like so. And now Bobby played his queen from d8 to e8. And now we are exiting the theoretical opening aspect of the game. We are exiting slowly the part of the game where, well, in the chess world they say that they have had these positions on their board at home, meaning that they have sat down with their seconds and have had these exact positions on their training boards at home. Probably they are still familiar with these positions, but we are slowly exiting that part and we are entering the creative part of the chess game where they have to generate ideas on positions that they have never seen before. So what is this move, queen to e8? What is that about? That is about breaking the pin from this bishop on the queen. You see now the knight can move, okay, without the queen being exposed to the bishop here. And how do we approach as white? How do we approach this position? How do we get further? How do we move our pieces closer to our opponent's king? What we need here is a so-called pawn break. We need some way to smash up the defensive structure here with these pawns on c7, d6 and e5. And what we need is a pawn to, for instance, this pawn, if this knight wasn't here, it could go up here and exchange itself off and smash a hole in the defensive structure. And the first part of that maneuver is knight from f3 to d2. What this does is it allows this pawn to move, and it also has a deeper plan of actually looking at this square, the c5 square. And that is actually where Tal has decided that his pawn break should be. he wants to somehow be able to play his pawn from c4 to c5, smash open the center, and make a hole, a dent in black's defenses, so that he can crash through with his pieces. Now, 16-year-old Bobby Fischer, how did he react to that? He also played a knight move, backwards knight move. Looks quite strange, maybe. Knight from f6 to h7. Now, what on earth is that about? It's about this bishop cramping his development. It's about that Tal has more space because he was allowed to gain the center, and Bobby needs to first of all exchange this strong bishop off, because it's very tough for him to get his queen, for instance, involved in the game, as long as it is here. And then, when that's exchanged off, he wants to be able to activate his other pieces, because you can see this guy, the rook on a8, and this guy, the bishop on c8, well, they are quite a bit behind. They are pretty far from actually entering this game. And knight to h7 is actually about that. So the question is it fast enough? Because here Tal played bishop, not bishop, pawn, from b2 to b4. And what is that about? The pawn here attacks c5. That means that when we can later play pawn to c5, we will be protected by our own pawn. It also makes space for this other knight to come to b3, where it will be behind the pawn and helping it attack c5. So now it's clear what white wants to do. Tal, the magician from Riga, as he was called, wants to open up the game by pushing at some point at an opportune moment, pushing the pawn from c4 to c5. What about Bobby's plan? He played bishop from g7 to f6, challenging this bishop. Tal drew the first blood and captured the bishop. That was promptly recaptured. So first bishop takes f6, and then knight on h7 takes f6, like so. And it's white's go again. White can move, and we see knight to b3. And if you notice how they are looking in opposite directions, that is because this knight came from b1 and this knight came from g1, and you will quite often see that the knights cross over each other. That's just a funny thing I've noticed, and I recommend, if you have the energy for it, the brain juice when you play, that you don't turn them. In some games, you just leave them looking towards their majesties in the center, so that you can discern which knight is which. Because later in the game, it's quite often interesting which knight took which route to get where they are. Can be quite surprising. It's just a little suggestion. If you don't want to do that, the other advice I have about the knights and how to orient them would be to have them looking at their opponent's king to sort of show their intent. You know, I'm coming for you, stupid white king. I'll come for you. Something like that. Those are the two knight strategies that I usually follow regarding how to orient the knights. Now, Bobby Fischer was a chess genius, even at 16-year-old. And he could see which way the wind was blowing. He could see c5 is going to be a problem. But he had freed up his queen now, so he could play queen to e7, X-ray defending c5. Quite cool. Tal would also like his queen to attack c5. But it's not very smart to put it here on d4, because Bobby controls that square and could just capture it. So how about this little idea? First he plays queen to d2. This attacks this pawn on h6. That has to be defended. Bobby defends with his king to h7. But now it's white to move again, and now we can move to e3 with the queen. Queen to e3. Now we are attacking here on c5. So that's a little idea on how you can get to sort of make two moves in a row. I just remembered something I'd love to share with you guys about this tournament. It was pretty historic in many ways and pretty epic. They were playing in 3 cities in what was then Yugoslavia, Bled and Zagreb, where they were during this game, and the last rounds were played in Belgrade. And in Belgrade, for instance, they had a 2,000 seat theater filled with chess fans. And the arbiters, at some points, when, for instance, Tals, when he played some brilliant moves, had to actually ask the audience to quiet down, because they were roaring and they were just shouting and being very excited. So imagine that there was a different time where you had 2,000 people in a sort of theater watching 8 guys play chess and just being super hype about it. And another really cool detail. You noticed I said the word arbiter. That's chess terminology. It just means the judge. The guy who had his job was to go around and make sure that everybody followed the rules and all the players are comfortable, and ask the audience to quiet down if they make too much noise. And that guy, who was an arbiter for this whole event, this whole candidate tournament, was a guy called Harry Golombek. And nobody really, knew too much about him back then, because all there was to know about him was ultra classified, like literally ultra classified, Project Ultra, because he worked with Alan Turing during the Second World War, and he was one of the guys at Bletchley Park who cracked the Enigma code, the German ciphers. And he worked with Alan Turing, who you may know as the sort of father of computer science. And he also, Alan Turing, by the way, also wrote the first chess program. You can learn more about that in my video on the history of computer chess. And he also worked with Hugh Alexander, who was two-time British chess champion and actually later beat Mikhail Tal, who was world chess champion at this game when this game was played here. So, well, the sort of innocuous, inconspicuous guy, Harry Golombek, who was going around being the arbiter, the judge for these games, was one of the most important but unsung heroes of the Second World War, because he was instrumental in cracking the Enigma code. Just how cool is that little detail? You know, I was reading up on this game and just noticed the name Harry Golombek. The Harry Golombek. Oh yeah, the Harry Golombek. And nobody knew. Maybe Petrosian knew because he was a KGB agent. We don't know. Bobby played knight to g8 in this position. Why did he do that? Seems like a very strange move. Well, he has defended against this coming pawn break here as well as he can. A move like pawn to b6 instead, trying to take more control of c5, doesn't work. There's a long variation, but you can check it out yourself, but it doesn't work. It leaves black with a bad position. So what does he do instead of trying to prevent this pawn break? He prepares his own pawn break, and knight to g8 allows for pawn to f5 that he wants to play. And in fact, we see pawn to c5 from Tal. It has been prepared. You can see he has orchestrated all the players in the symphony orchestra, and they are ready to make like a beautiful harmony. And he breaks with c4, to which Bobby Fischer replies with pawn to f5. And up until this point, the game has been very calm, and now we see what chess is all about. No more theory that you have prepared with your seconds at home or in the hotel. Now it's true, unbridled genius versus genius. And Tal picks up the pawn on e4 and captures on f5. This is, of course, immediately recaptured. It is recaptured with pawn 2 on g6. Pawn g6 takes f5. And what Tal is doing here is he is challenging this pawn break so that Bobby is not able to get his way and develop his pieces, because Tal knows that when he makes the chessboard sing, he wants the black pieces, the sort of the choir here, he wants them to be mute. In particular, the bishop here and the rook, they have not yet joined the game plan, Bobby's game plan, and he wants to, Tal wants to get his symphony going before these two voices are able to join the choir. So pawn 2 from f2 to f4 was Tal's way of doing that. This, of course, helps open up the rook, and it also stops the advancement of these pawns. Now Bobby played pawn on e5, takes f4, I mean, and offering up a queen trade. Now Tal could play queen takes queen, but that is defended by the knight on g8. That's another reason why Bobby put the knight back here on g8. And with the queens off in this position right here, the checkmating attack would not really materialize, probably, because the queen is currently needed to create threats, and therefore Tal instead just captured with the queen takes f4 here. So far, so good. Now, Bobby probably thought at this point that he had succeeded, because he can now play pawn on d6 takes c5. And the thing is that if Tal recaptures with pawn on b4 takes c5, he can play knight on d7 takes c5, backed up by the queen, so there's no knight takes c5 because queen could capture with check. And it looks like he is finally succeeding in pushing the attack back. That would give him the much needed time to get these two guys, the bishop on c8 and the rook on a8, into the game. But Tal had this sort of unparalleled feel for the initiative, and he was an absolute master of knowing when you could sacrifice material, and by material I mean like chess pieces, for time, for quality, for getting his pieces into better positions. And here he played bishop to d3. So he's not recapturing. In fact, he is allowing Bobby to capture another pawn with pawn on c5 takes b4, pawn on b4. So now Tal, he's down with 2 pawns here. And this pawn here is attacking this knight. There's no queen takes pawn because it's protected by, the pawn is protected by the black queen. But if you remember, I've been saying this again and again about how Tal wanted every piece to participate in the attack. And now that he has smashed up the game, he has lines of attack. And he can play rook on a1 to e1, attacking the queen, just saying, yeah, you don't have time to capture my knight, because I will capture your queen. And Bobby plays queen to f6, saying, well, what you got? And here we saw what Tal really was made of. Because here Tal played rook on e1 to e6, attacking the queen, knowing full well that Bobby can now play queen takes knight on c3, simultaneously getting out of the attack and capturing a knight, now being a knight and 2 pawns ahead. And this is actually the losing move, the move where you get the knight and you are ahead so far in material. From here on, we just see sort of the brilliance of the 22-year-old Mikhail Tal. The queen had to go back instead of capturing knight, had to go back to g7 and defend the king. the attack against the king is so much stronger than Bobby expected, and maybe what most people would expect. But yeah, Tal was still a young man, and his playing style was not yet known and understood in all its glory. People would learn to respect Tal, and they would learn that if you give this guy the initiative, you will be smashed to bits. In this position, he played bishop on d3, captures pawn on f5. That is check to His Majesty, and Bobby had a plan, he had a way, he thought, to get out of this. Because he didn't want to just move the king. Because if he did that, he would expose himself to a later tactic of rook takes h6 with check. The white pieces would fly in. There are many variations. You can check them yourself if you want to. But that's very, very dangerous. And Bobby had this idea that he would just instead give up what we call the exchange, because the rook is better than the bishop. So he would capture the rook, get the bishop, but then losing the rook. So rook takes f5, and then queen takes f5, and that again is check. So Bobby gave up a little bit of material, but now the dangerous bishop is gone. He can play king to h6. The knight on g8 protects h8, so there is no rook takes h8. And he thought that he was safe. Now, these two guys, they haven't entered the game. So, when you say that white is behind in material and that black has more pieces, well, it's true that black has more pieces on the board, but that is only relevant if they can play a part in the game. Otherwise, they might as well be off the board. So, how can Tal push his advantage further so that he does not give Bobby the chance to get these pieces in the game? If Bobby gets these pieces in the game, he will have a very, very, very good position, because he's a hidden material. He has more pieces on the board. But Tal's not going to allow it. So Tal plays rook on f1 to f3. This attacks the queen. If you remember this funny knight that came from the other side of the chessboard, and it was looking at c5, is actually also doing something pretty funny. It's also defending a1 and c1. So the queen can't get out of this attack with a check like this or like that, because the knight is actually defending that. And here it's defended by the rook. So the queen had to go to g2. And now Tal could play rook on e6 to e8. So the rook here on f3 has been much improved, because on f3 it's able to go to g3 and attacking here on g8. So already, if it was white's move again, we could play rook takes g8, king takes g8, and then rook check here, and we would have a checkmating attack. Or maybe black could defend the checkmating attack, but the only way would be to give up the queen. So that would be a losing variation. And that is why we saw knight on d7 to f6. That was what Bobby played. And now we get the part of Tal's play, Tal's brilliance, that is maybe the hardest to emulate. If you go out yourself and you play some chess, maybe you play online, maybe you play with friends, and like we all do this. We watch a video about a Tal game, and then we try to sacrifice some pieces because it looks so cool, and then we just lose horribly. And of course it helps that Tal is one of the best chess players of all time, and he's an absolute genius. But he also had some concepts that are extremely hard to master. For instance, switching the gears in the attack. He has been playing for checkmate. He has been playing for checkmate. He has been playing for checkmate. And now he understood that in exactly this position, he could actually exchange the queens with an advantage. And he could, instead of having this ferocious attack, he could convert that. He could, they called him the magician from Riga. He could, swing his magic wand and convert this ferocious attack into a boa constrictor-like positional advantage where black didn't have any good moves, where every single move black had would hurt his position. So he captured the knight. That is check. We cannot recapture with the knight on g8. If we could, we would be winning. But there is an absolute pin. The rook on e8 pins this knight absolutely to the king. But the queen can capture. The queen captures f6. And rook captures f6. Okay. And now, what can black do? Can you move this bishop? No. It's pinned to this rook. As soon as you move it anywhere, Tal could capture your rook. That doesn't work. You could move your rook here or here. That doesn't do anything. And Tal has a very simple plan. He's going to attack the pinned piece. This is often a winning strategy. He wants to play rook to f8, rook on f6 to f8. Now this knight can't move. It also can't really be protected, so we can go and capture it. Therefore, Bobby Fischer played king on h8 to g7, attacking this rook. Now the rook went to f8, attacking the knight on g8 as we discussed. But here, now the knight is no longer pinned, so the knight can move to e7. Then you may ask, can't Tal just capture that? Well, the point of king to g7 was also that it attacks f8. So if rook takes e7, check, then king takes f8 with a good game. Knight to e8, e7 I mean, also protects c8, so that we can't go and capture here because it's attacked twice and only defended once. So far so good. But Tal also had this knight, and it had done its duty. It had attacked c5, defended c1 and a1. Now it's time to get it involved in the game in this new manner, in this new boa constrictor like strategy of just denying blacks the opportunity to make productive moves. And the first part of that plan is knight on b3 to a5. So this has a destiny, it has a route. You will see it unfold, but Tal could also be patient. So when Bobby played pawn to h5, he didn't continue at once with his plan. He almost sadistically played pawn from h2 to h4, just stopping this pawn in its tracks, just saying, you are not going anywhere. None of your pieces are going anywhere. Now, what can black do? This pawn can't move. This knight is needed to protect this bishop that's attacked twice and otherwise only defended once. This pawn can't move, just be captured. This bishop can't move because this rook would be captured. So there's very, very few things that black can actually do. Bobby played rook on a8 to b7. Doesn't do much. We see this knight getting closer to its destination. Knight on a5 to c4. And we saw pawn to b5 attacking this knight, hoping against hope that we would be able to play rook to b6 and somehow get out of this. But knight to e5. And in this position, and I will explain why, Bobby Fischer shook Tal's hand, and Tal won the game. And I will explain why this position is hopeless. After saying that Tal won the candidates tournament at the age of 22 with a very, very good score. Paul Keres came second. He's another character that we haven't talked much about on the channel. He's one of the best chess players of all time, but he never became world champion. He is probably the second best chess player of all time who was not a world chess champion. The other guy being Viktor Korchnoi. And they called him Paul II because on many, many occasions he fell just short of becoming a world champion. Just being edged out by Tal or by other people. And Tal went on in 1960 to play Botvinnik for the World Chess Championship, and giving a quite dominant performance. His inspired attacking style was too much for Botvinnik, who had a more scientific or maybe even rigid approach to chess, and he got destroyed. Botvinnik did, and Tal became at that point youngest world chess champion in history at the ripe age of 23. That is not the end of Tal's story or of Botvinnik's story, because he was king of the rematch, but that's probably for another video. Now let's just explain why Bobby resigned this position. So what can you do? What moves do you have here? If you move the knight, you lose the bishop. If you move the bishop, you lose the rook. This can't move because of if you move this here, we can capture it. if you move here, there's this rule called en passant. You should Google it. You could capture like that. It's a real rule. So there's not really anything you could do. Let's say you played pawn to a5. And then there's a checkmate in 2. Rook f7 checks the king, protected by the knight. The knight also attacks g6, so you can't go here, can't go here, 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 or here because of the rooks. So the only legal move is king h6 and then rook on e8 to h8 is checkmate. So that should explain why why Bobby felt compelled to resign. I hope that you enjoyed this video on this perfectly regular sized chessboard. Maybe if you did, you can leave a regular sized chess comment in the comments or give a regular sized thumbs up. Otherwise, I hope you got something from this, and I hope I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.